Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Mining Modern. I'm Corbin Hosler, as always, with Cool Stuff, and this is Blue-White Spirits. This deck got a absolutely massive boost in Modern over the past couple months. Skyclave Apparition. Look at this thing at his Zendikar Rising. Exile a non-land, non-token permanent you don't control with CMC 4 or less. That is a lot. 4 or less, not 3 or less like you might see. It can hit something that costs more mana than it does, and when it leaves the battlefield, its owner creates an XX blue illusion, where X is the CMC of the exiled card. So the card will be exiled forever. They will get a creature at the end of it. But by the way, Skyclave Apparition, it's a spirit. And Modern is a format with a lot of spirit lords. For instance, Drogskol Captain +1 in hexproof. Rattlechains, you give your spirits flash, sort of the secret lord of the deck. Supreme Phantom, your generic +1/+1 on a really nice 1/3 body. That's basically the sort of the core of a spirits deck these days, and you don't even need green. No collected company here. Spell Queller also hits something CMC 4 or less. So Skyclave Apparition kind of rounds out the other half of the Spell Queller equation. What do you do when something hits play? Spell Queller doesn't do anything anymore. Well, Skyclave Apparition does, and conversely, when you need to stop something from resolving, Skyclave Apparition can't do that, but Spell Queller can. It's a really nice addition to the deck, and it happens to be a spirit on top of that. Another new one here is Shacklegeist, the Brainstorm Brewery preview card. It's my podcast, Brainstorm Brewery, if anybody's interested in listening to it. But we got to preview the card Shacklegeist here, and it's a nice addition to the deck as well. It's a 2/2 for 2 with flying. It can only block creatures with flying. But here's the big thing. Tap 2 untap spirits you control, tap a creature you don't control. That allows you to control some combat steps, and it's not like this deck has a problem putting creatures into play. You saw it's a deck full of creatures. We just get our interaction at the same time. For instance, Mausoleum Wanderer can keep counter spells off your back and keep removal from getting your creatures. It can keep you from getting comboed to death. Selfless Spirit can protect your stuff from removal. Oh, by the way, Giver of Runes, quiet addition to the deck here. Not a spirit, but well worth it, giving your other creatures protection. And that's a big deal, you know, just being able to protect your Skyclave Apparition or your Spell Queller later on in the game when your opponent's trying to get the value out of them. And, of course, Aether Vial to power everything out. Onto the lands here, we've got the fetch lands you'd expect, some Horizon Canopies and Waterlogged Groves for draw. But this deck gets to be fairly straightforward with a blue-white mana base, thanks to how straightforward the deck is. You don't have to dip into green for company in this build. You get to have a nice straightforward mana base, and you get to run a lot of these draw lands here, Horizon lands. In addition to all of that, I mean, look how clean this deck is. It's a lot of 4-ofs. It's a nice 1, 2, 3 curve. Nothing costs more than 3. It is a very, very nice looking deck. And the sideboard's pretty straightforward as well and very powerful. Damping Sphere where you need it. Force of Negation, huge addition to Modern. Really, I think probably one of the few cards for Modern Horizons that actually made the format better. But Force of Negation was great for Modern. Rest in peace for the graveyard decks. Blessed Alliance does a lot of good stuff. It can get rid of a Death Shadow type deck, by the way. And then Auriok Champion, if we run into those red decks that are just trying to aggro you out, nothing like an Auriok Champion on turn 2 to stop them. So everybody, that's the deck. We're checking in on new look Azorius Spirits here with Zendikar Rising in Modern. So everybody, thank you so much for watching. Let's hop into the games. All right, back on the play with Spirits, and I think we keep this one double Spell Queller, Supreme Phantom. That's pretty good, I think, anyways. I mean, there's no turn 1 play here. That is what it is. But double Spell Queller, it's got a nice ring to it, right? It's pretty powerful. And there's some removal as well. I'm not sure what our opponent's up to, but I'm going to fetch before the Leonin Arbiter comes down. I know that. Well, this is pretty good. I mean, the Spell Queller's at 2/3. The stats seem like they're fine, right? It's a sort of definition of fine, but and there's the Leonin Arbiter. But making them into 3/4s, that changes the math quite a bit. Now, I guess in this case, it's not like we have to worry about our opponent having lightning bolts, you know, and that 4 toughness being super relevant, but it's still pretty relevant, right? I could even, if I wanted, go for like a surprise block on my opponent here. That's a real thing. Now, they might choose to just Field of Ruin us, and I'll figure out what I want to do about that. Oh, this is so much better. They're just going to cast a spell. Now, I don't love the idea of them getting a Skyclave Apparition later. But we'll see what we can do to protect this thing. Yeah, it's a Shacklegeist Brainstorm Brewery preview card. Okay, let's see here. Play our land. We've got some options. I mean, I guess I say we've got some options. It seems fairly straightforward. We're going to play the Mausoleum Wanderer and attack for 4 and pass. So our opponent's going to be hard-pressed, I think, to actually keep up with our clock here. 4 in the air adds up pretty quickly, but more than that, if they were to tap out for a big spell here or whatever, and we get a Spell Queller or another, and then we're attacking for a billion basically in the air, the next swing would be for 6, 7, 9. Yeah, that's pretty powerful. So that said, they have this stupid Leonin Arbiter block going on here. Now, here's the question. What do I do? What if I, like, path the Leonin Arbiter in response? I think this is actually the line, because my opponent can activate Field of Ruin. If I just tried to... I think that if I just tried to pay 2, I think that uses the stack, and my opponent could respond by Field of Ruining us. As it stands now, though... I mean, look how this still works out, right? Because now we get to search our deck. Fortunately, we do have another basic there. I still have Spell Queller up. They did nothing but... This is just beautiful for us, right? They did nothing but lose their creature and lose their Ghost Quarter. And as you can see, that earns a scoop. Alright, mono white taxes. I guess Blessed Alliance is probably fine here. I don't know how our deck matches up against mono white taxes. Probably pretty decently, frankly. I'm going to cut a Vial... I'm going to cut a Selfless Spirit. Opponent's probably not playing a lot of Wraths. This seems like a solid plan, though. Cutting a Vials... I mean, a lot of these Spirit decks sometimes only play 3 Vials, which is, I think, a really interesting innovation over the past year or two. It's pretty cool. So I don't feel bad cutting one. I am going to ship this hand, obviously. And this is a much, much different looking hand. This is powerful. I'm going to ship the... I guess the Windswept Heath back. I have everything I need. Right? Any land I draw after this will be able to cast 3 drops, I think. I don't think there's any other colorless lands in here. I think I can do this. But look what we can do here. Double Giver of Runes? Pretty good when your opponent's trying to play a bunch of creature-based interaction. And if we can get the double giver of runes protecting each other before a Skyclave Apparition arrives to break it all up, that's pretty good. And even if the Skyclave Apparition gets one of them, if that's what happens on turn 3 here, well, that one's a little more difficult to beat. Just gonna try to race this Batterskull, I guess. Well, this does get protection from colorless, right? Oh, yeah, it does. Protection from colorless or the color of your choice. Alright, and there we go. I can also use this to fetch now before we get into any shenanigans from Leonin Arbiter. Oops. Let's place other Giver of Runes out. This makes our opponent decide between Skyclave Apparition or cheating in the Batterskull. This is going to be a hard one. Batterskull's a hard card to beat, but Giver of Runes goes a long way to making it possible. And next turn we can probably just play the Shacklegeist. So this is a big turn, I think, in this one. If our opponent can't answer the Giver of Runes trade now, they're in trouble. And there you go, they could. Which is fine. Gives us a land. That actually is a relevant land too, because now I can double spell next turn. I can play Shacklegeist and hold up the Rattlechains. And we still have access to a Giver of Runes now, right? Now our opponent burned their spell, get one of them, and it can't give protection from itself, but it can give any of our other creatures protection from a Batterskull. They're going to have to find another removal spell for this Giver of Runes just to be able to start interacting. And as it stands, it looks like our opponent's just going to try to flash in the Batterskull. Think they missed the land drop here. Looks pretty good for us. Because look, I can just keep attacking in the air. We have ground action here with Mutavault, but we don't need it. And I mean, obviously that was an insane draw. This is how you beat a Batterskull. Batterskull, not quite the terror it used to be, because all of our creatures fly. And you know what? Even more. Like, not only, and this is MVP Shacklegeist here, not only do we have the Giver of Runes for protection from the Batterskull, we also have the Shacklegeist to tap 2 untap spirits we control and tap it. So, at the beginning of their combat, I'm just going to use the Supreme Phantom and the Selfless Spirit to tap down this Batterskull. I don't even have to give up my Giver of Runes activation to open it up to a path. This match is just locked up. Look how powerful Blue-White Spirits is here. This is really something. The opponent plays turn 2 Stoneforge on the play, and just effortlessly are we beating it. Now, clearly, our opponent missing land drops helped, but this is a clinic. As far as, not for me, I don't think I've done anything particularly special, but it's a clinic of what this Spirits deck is capable of. Am I swinging for lethal? I bet I am with that. What a draw. What a deck. So many Lords. That'll do it, everybody. Spirits just cruising to victory. Wow. Ooh, look at that one. Okay, that is... We got a little teaser. Actually, you know what? Let's put this match first. So you see, I recorded another match you'll see after this. It's a long one, so settle in. It's a good demonstration of what the deck's capable of. Let's put this one first, though. You know what? This match was great. I loved it. All right. On to the next one. Let's get some recordings done. All right. Welcome, everybody, to the matches here with Blue-White Spirits. I think I keep this hand. We're on the play. It's a double Aether Vial hand, and you know what? This hand functions pretty well off double Aether Vial, I think. We get to bring the Wanderer in nice and early. We get to have the Path to Exile up after that. Honestly, this is pretty good. A 1-2-3 curve on a double Vial. Maybe we find another land, maybe we don't, but I don't know if we'll even need it. You know, obviously I would certainly like to have a second one as soon as possible even, but we'll see what happens here. I mean, this is powerful. Just having access to a Spell Queller is in itself just such a powerful effect. And I mean, look at the cards. If our opponent's playing a creature deck, we have evasive creatures and removal. If they're playing a control deck, we have flash creatures that are going to mess with them. They get around counter magic with the vials. We just have a hand here that has a lot of game against pretty much everything. It's a really nice opener with one land. You know, it is what it is, right? So I used to say, and I'm going to, I guess, fill some time here as our opponent makes up their mind as to whether or not they want to play this game with us. But I used to always say with Merfolk in Modern, if you couldn't keep one-landers, you couldn't play the deck, because that was just something you had to do on the draw sometimes, or with files or so on. So I'm not scared of one-land hands. Obviously, the London Mulligan probably changed the math on what you do and don't mulligan, but I don't look at this hand and worry about it only having one land. I look at this hand and say, I can play everything in this hand. All 7 cards. So we'll run our Vial out here, and let's see what our opponent's up to. They mulligan down to 6, so we're, you know, we draw another land or two, we're going to be in a great spot. Now, the one downside here is that the 2 Aether Vials are great, and obviously if you're going to have 2 Aether Vials, you want them on, you know, turn 1 and turn 2. But it does kind of represent card disadvantage in the sense that they aren't creatures, you know, and if we draw all Aether Vials and our opponent draws removal for our creatures, well, the fact that we were able to cheat them into play doesn't really mean much if we have a bunch of Vials left over at the end and no creatures to attack with. So that can be the downside of a Aether Vial heavy hand like this. But that's where, you know, the one land kind of makes up for that, right? I'd rather have 2 lands in 1 vial, I think, than 1 land in 2 vials, but it's not that different in the end, I think. And our opponent is up to some kind of blue shenanigans over there. So I have to imagine that all of these cards, maybe sans the Path to Exile, are going to be pretty decent here. I mean, basic islands here in Visions, there's really no telling, right? But they went 1 top, 1 bottom with it. All right, well, if we hit a land, we'll have, I guess, it probably doesn't mean much. It means we need to keep up a Path to Exile that we, aren't really going to cast. So, let's see here. That said, I obviously would take another land. All right, not exactly a land, but Skyclave Apparition means that the Aether Vial here that ends up on 3 to Spell Queller something, we're actually going to have our choice between a Spell Queller or a Skyclave Apparition, which is, I think, pretty nice. We're going to start to turn the corner very hard. So our opponent probably needs to be on some kind of combo deck, I dare say, just because it just seems difficult otherwise for them to deal with, a Mausoleum Wanderer sitting play here. Next turn, we're going to have at least a Rattlechains, possibly more, depending on what we hit with our draw step. And then the turn after that, Spell Queller or Skyclave Apparition come down on turn 4. And that's a fair amount of interaction our opponent has to work through, right? If they're trying to play a control route, it's rough for them, and if they're trying to play a combo route where the Wanderer and the Queller will kind of disrupt him. As it is here, just Scalding Tarn, fetching out a Rogren. I don't know how to say this word, actually. Anyways, fetching out this Triome, that's not particularly concerning. Remember to vial in my Wanderer here. Well, there's probably nothing I could draw here that actually makes me get the bonus on this. Because I will be holding the Rattlechains probably regardless. What's our opponent going to do with their 1 blue mana in the instep? Anything? Because remember, Rattlechains, not only does it give your spirits flash, when it enters play, target spirit gains hexproof and has flash, of course. So in this case, the Vial gives it flash, but it means we can protect our spirits from whatever our opponent could have. Whatever they're thinking about, and I don't know what this would be, Dismember, I guess. We'll be able to beat it. In fact, Dismember would be quite the blowout if that's what my opponent has, and they let me put the Vial counters on here. Because paying for life just to get your Dismember countered by us bringing in a Rattlechains can't feel very good. That said, I probably have to put the Rattlechains into play on their instep regardless, because we just need the clock, right? I mean, we're as good as I feel about our hand, we are poking our opponent for 1 damage here. There's a land. It probably doesn't change much this turn. All right, well, we'll poke in for 1 here. Our opponent not going to pull the trigger on whatever they're thinking about. It could just be something, yeah, there you go, simple as an opt, or in this case, I guess, a Thought Scour. They just hit lands and another Serum Vision, so there's a Flagstones. Interesting. So it's Jeskai something. I wonder what the Flagstones is for. What if they're playing Cleansing Wildfire or whatever the Zendikar Rising card is that I think destroys a land you control and a land an opponent controls? Good old-fashioned boom-bust type action. One of my favorite modern decks ever was just a red-white boom-bust deck I had made, and all it aimed to do was leave opponents with 0 permanents. Play Magus of the Tabernacle, which gives a Tabernacle Pendril Veil effect to all creatures in play. You have to pay 1 in your upkeep or sacrifice it. And then you would play Boom Bust, and you would just blow up all the lands, and then I would have a Signet or a Flagstones or a Crucible of Worlds or something like that to bring the lands back, and our opponent would just have to sacrifice all their creatures, have no lands, no permanents. It was beautiful, honestly. That said, that deck is likely entirely unplayable now. I don't even know that we'd ever be able to win a game. But it was certainly a fun one back in the day. Meanwhile, our opponent has figured it out. It's a Confounding Conundrum. So they're going to draw a card here, and whenever a land enters the battlefield under opponent's control, they have to pick one up. So it actually does... It doesn't hose fetch lanes, per se, but it does kind of slow them down. I play this card in Commander anyway, so I don't know if it works out in Modern or not. But we'll go ahead and fetch here. In theory, this card doesn't matter at all. I don't anticipate... I mean, look, I don't really... I can just fetch on their turn, so I don't really think we're in too much of a concern here either way. I'll tell you, this is not the fastest match I've ever played. That's the true secret to making YouTube content. Being able to talk a lot. It's you and a camera. And an opponent who goes very slow. And that's just how it is sometimes. That said, our opponent is now going to play another Serum Visions. And you know what? They can have this because I'm just going to play the Rattlechains. I'm going to start attacking for 3. I'm going to hold up a Spell Queller and a Path to Exile. And I'm not really sure what my opponent's going to do about it. They've spent 8 minutes to play 3 turns. So they're probably just going to time out before they're able to beat us in a couple games here. Just something to keep in mind as we play through this one. And that is, I say this all the time, but it is part of playing on Magic Online. Just like on Arena, there's a clock, and in high-level play, League weekend matches, we've seen people lose to the clock. And it's a real thing. It's just a mechanic you have to... It's just a mechanic you have to play around, right? It's something you have to incorporate into your game. Now, I'm someone who tends to play fairly fast. You know, if you were to play with me in paper, you'd see me go just fly through turns, really, because I tend to, for better or worse, once I sort of make my mind up about something, I'm going to stick to it, and I'm not really going to deviate from that plan unless I need to. And you see the downside of that sometimes here on Mighty Modern Punting Pioneer, where I don't take in new information and mess it up. But, you know, on the plus side, I do finish my matches. I don't go to time. Not to say one is, you know, better or worse than the other or whatever, but I like to play quickly. I also think that it keeps the pressure on your opponent to constantly be the one making decisions. And I don't mean that you do this in an aggressive way or whatever. But when I play in paper, I figure out what I'm going to do at the beginning of my turn, and then I do it. I don't waste time on small actions. Anyways, speaking of all that, we're going to take this file up to 3. We're going to start swinging in for 3. And we're going to have a Spell Queller up for anything our opponent might do here. So, this is going to begin the clock. It'll put him down to 15. I could use the Skyclave Apparition on the Confounding Conundrum. Not that I'd really care to hit the Confounding Conundrum, but, I mean, it would put my Skyclave Apparition into play to attack. So that's... Any little clock we can put up there, I think, is probably a good idea. When, you know, our opponent's sitting at 18, we got to speed it up a little bit here. Rattlechains is a pretty nice draw, honestly, because, I mean, look at the position we're in now. We have Spell Queller up for, you know, whatever our opponent does. But on top of that, we also have Rattlechains up. So we can protect our spirits if our opponent tries to go the removal route. And it also means, say our opponent tries to play a Wrath of God or something like that, we can hit it with the Spell Queller, exile it. And then even if they were to try to follow up with point removal for the Spell Queller, we have the Rattlechains to protect it. So this is, you can sort of see how all of it works together, right? And if they find... you know, if they try to... This taxes their mana at the same time. The Path to Exile can mess with blockers. This deck just comes at you on many angles, and that's kind of where you need to be at in Modern. You either have to be incredibly, at least in 2020 Modern, incredibly linear and pretty much aggressive, but, you know, dredge, super linear. And this has always been true of Modern, but you look at the mono-red decks now, the mono-red prowess type decks or the black-red prowess decks, those things don't play anything that costs more than 2 mana, and most of their spells only cost 1 mana. That's how efficient Modern has become. Our opponent is on Old School Storm. Pyromancer Ascension. I'll tell you what, friend. I'm going to let you have your Pyromancer Ascension, and as soon as you cast a spell, I'm going to Skyclave Apparition it. Out of here. And start attacking. So we can do this. We'll respond to the trigger, so it doesn't even get the first trigger here. Wow, this is just truly old school Jeskai Storm. I'm not sure what the white's for in the Storm deck, but it's a bit of a throwback. I like it. We'll be coming in for 5 damage after this. 7 if we end up adding the Rattlechains. 7 makes it 2 turns. And that might be what I do here. Alright, we'll get rid of the Pyromancer Ascension. It's absurd that Skyclave Apparition can hit not just creatures, right? We've seen this type of effect before, the sort of the O-ring on a creature type effect, Fairground Wardens, that sort of thing. Skyclave Apparition hits non-creature, non-land permanents, like this Pyromancer Ascension, and it's CMC 4 or less. Now, that is a really powerful effect to put into Modern. But I love that it's fair. I love that, one, it's a creature, right? It's a white creature. And we get rid of it, you get something. And in some cases, it's better than getting the original permanent back. Like, imagine our opponent finding an answer to the Skyclave Apparition later on in this game. They may not want their Pyromancer Ascension back at that point, but they may need a blocker. Maybe not a blocker, I suppose. All of our creatures fly, but consider a world where our creatures didn't fly. Then we're attacking with the Giver of Runes. They'd have a blocker. That's how that would work. So by responding to the trigger here on the Pyromancer Ascension, we don't let our opponent cast another spell to get a second counter, and then who knows what they would do, right? But this is a much safer way to go about this. So now they're going to Thought Scour themselves, but there's no Ascension to get a counter, and then they're going to be down to 1 mana, and we're going to be coming in for 7 damage with a Spell Queller up after that. So I got to say, pretty much according to plan here from the Spirit side, that's for sure. Yeah, they are playing Cleansing Wildfire. I think this is a cool card for what it's worth. It actually didn't do exactly... I was describing Boom Bust earlier. This destroys land. Its controller can get a basic and then draw a card. So you hit your own Flagstones with it. Turn 1, Ragran Triome or whatever. Turn 2 Flagstones. Hit your Flagstones. You'll kill the Flagstones. You'll go get a land from the Cleansing Wildfire. And you'll get a land from the Flagstones dying and go into your graveyard. It ramps you and draws you a card. It is a powerful interaction, I have to say. Alright, well, I'm going to go for this. It's risky, but I feel like upping our clock to 7 instead of 5, making it 2 turns, is worth it here. And if our opponent has a Lightning Bolt or whatever, game's not over. Because I don't know where they plan on going with this, but basically I don't want to let them set up for another turn and then be able to try to combo. I want to make them go for it all at once. So I feel like putting the 7 power into play here, our opponent has to be having connection issues or something. I've never seen anything quite like this. But if they get it set up and then untap, because we get them down to 2 life or whatever, we put them... Imagine we didn't bring in the Rattlechains here and we attack for 5, put them to 8. Even if we had the Rattlechains after that, it's only 7. It puts them to 1. And that's just a gigantic difference. So I think we just have to put our 7 power into play and, kind of see what happens, right? If our opponent is a non-removal, well, then sure, I'll have to trade my Mausoleum Wanderer for it, and we'll hit him for 6. And then we'll still be one short, but, you know, it's not too much we can do about that. But on the other hand, if, you know, this Ragrown Triome is not representing a Path to Exile or a Lightning Bolt, then we get to try to kill him in 2 hits. But it is a path. And I will be countering this because I have the Aether Vial. I don't need to go get a land. I don't want to lose my Skyclave Apparition and give them a token. Again, not that the token could actually block any of our stuff, but there's no reason to give it to him. Besides, at this rate, and our opponent's going to time out before we even get to game 2. Alright, so I assume they got to be having connection issues or something over there. This is a true test of how much time can you fill, Corbin. Well, this is working out, though. The game may be going slowly, but it is going in our favor. So I feel good about that. We're going to say no to both of these Aether Vial triggers here, and we just get a pass with the Spell Queller open. So the thing is, hitting them for 6, putting them to 7, the Spell Queller does represent lethal here. Because we were able to upgrade from 5 damage in play to 6 damage in play. And I think that will end up making a difference here, because that's that 1 point of damage that we needed. So as long as our opponent, with their 4 cards in hand, doesn't do anything too dangerous, they can't be answered with, you know, a Path and a Spell Queller, things are going to work out just fine here in this one. And a second Spell Queller is nice. It doesn't actually do anything right now. I can only play one of them. And then I have lethal anyways, right? So it kind of almost, the second one almost doesn't matter. But it certainly could matter, right? Depending on what our opponent wants to do. Well, let's pass the turn back. The problem with the Cleansing Wildfire Flagstones of Troll Engine, and frankly, I guess there's probably no problem with it, because you're happy to throw Cleansing Wildfire at your opponent's Tron land and cycle. And, I mean, they clearly got a plan going on here with these confounding conundrums as well, right? So you can't say they don't have a plan. All right, well, we're going to try to Spell Queller the path here and see what happens. They're going to Snapcast another one. Well, in response to the Vial, well, you know what? That's a good play. Okay. Well, we're not going to be able to kill him this turn, but, you know, on the other hand, they're not comboing us to death, right? They're trying to interact with our board fairly, and that's a situation where the second Spell Queller will come up pretty handy. Now, if I had drawn a land there, we could have got both of these, but we'll hit this first one. Wait a minute. Oh, this is kind of bad, isn't it? I Spell Queller this one, and then my opponent uses the one in the graveyard to path the Spell Queller, and then they get the free one to path the Skyclave Apparition, and then I have 4 power in the air, kills him in 2 turns. I guess that's where we're at. We'll have a Spell Queller up. I mean, we do get a little blown out here, in the sense that this exchange works very well for my opponent, but it's not that bad. Because we still... Look, this is not the 2-turn clock we wanted, but we still get to hit him for 4 in the air. I have access to another Spell Queller. We're not in any danger of dying. They're tapped out. And if this was the best they could do with their turn, that's probably good for us. I guess we had to clear out our deck of some lands here, too. I think they actually sequenced this wrong, though. They needed to let it resolve. They did not do that. I could be wrong here. But I feel like, yeah, they sequenced this wrong. You do have to learn that lesson. Because the way it works, the reason Spell Queller is such a good card, when it's battlefield, exile, target spell CMC4 or less. When it leaves, they can play it without paying its mana cost. So, notice that's 2 separate triggers. One on entering the battlefield. Counter exile target spell with CMC4 or less. And then leaves the battlefield. They can cast the exiled card without paying its mana cost. Well, if you put the first ability, the counter ability on the stack, or the exile ability, but then you remove the Spell Queller, you trigger the second ability, actually goes on top of the stack, and the second ability triggers first. They get to cast the exiled card for free. But there's no exiled card because the original ability hadn't resolved yet. That's what happened there, and that's why that did not work out for our opponent. It doesn't quite immediately cost them the game. I mean, we're still only coming in for not even 6, right? They have a block, so it's still just 4. And honestly, it's the difference between them having a 2/2 on the ground or not. Doesn't seem hugely relevant. I could also path this thing, swing for 6. We have lots of good draws here. We could hit like a Drogskol Captain or something, and that gives us lethal if we path plus Drogskol. Obviously, I think just passing the turn back with the Spell Queller up is good for us too. This is an interesting match. I mean, as slow as this match has been, I feel like we've got a lot out of the turns that we have played. One, you see that our opponent actually is doing something pretty cool here with this whole Flagstone's Cleansing Wildfire build. And the Confounding Conundrum, it looks a little odd, but consider the ramp these days. Consider the Primeval Titan decks. Consider the basic fetch land that every deck plays a billion of. When a land enters battlefield under a player's control, if they had another, they pick one up. So that means it essentially works to sort of, I'm not going to say strip mine, kind of maybe like Vorin collects your opponents. It takes away 1 mana, because if they have 2 mana and they play a fetch land, they can't get access to that 3rd mana without picking a land up immediately. So they might get their 3 mana on that turn. They can tap in their pool before they pick it up. But then it punishes them the next turn because they're still a turn behind. That is what's cool about a card like this, and that's before you even get into the fact of a bunch of decks just ramping. And by the way, it cycles when it comes into play. Modern has a great history of cards sort of like Confounding Conundrum, and I think that Cleansing Wildfire probably fits the bill a little more, where it just works sometimes. It works in some decks, in some matchups, but in a worst case scenario where it does nothing, your opponent's playing 22 basic forests, well, you still get to draw a card. It still cycles. So it's a low downside card and a high upside card, and that's really cool. Modern is a little too fast for something like this these days, I think. The problem is that you can't really mess around with low downside cards, because even just the cost of cycling it essentially for 2 mana, I mean, even that can be too slow in a format where people are playing, nothing but 1-drops. So I think this is going to end up being a 1-game match, because I don't think our opponent's going to be able to get in a second game here. But what I was saying is that we've seen a lot of play back and forth. I mean, this is a really good approximation of basically how any Snapcaster deck is going to play. They're going to basically do exactly this, and that's okay for the Modern Spirits deck, and that's where the blue-white version, I think, really comes in a pretty decent spot. So, all right, well, no reason to attack with this. Our opponent's just going to block. So we'll get in with the Rattlechains. Put our opponent down to 3. Yeah, good enough. They realize they're not going to get there. And they might want to play a second game. What do you know? I guess rest in peace. Not that rest in peace is even incredible here. Like I said, 1-game match. Our opponent did not have the time there. All right, well, we'll hop into another one here. You got... at the very least, some commentary. You got to see how the deck works. That was a great game for us. That our opponent gave a reasonable approximation of what a control deck will do to try to stop you, and you can see we just rolled over it. So they must have had some connection issues to time out there. But it's a good intro to the deck. Let's get some more games in. Is this a 1-lander we can keep? Now, that is a question. We're on the play, and I sure do want to try, but I don't think with the 2/3 drops I can. It's not like this deck plays a lot of lands. This I can keep, though. Look at this hand. I'm going to throw a Mausoleum Wanderer back under, and I'm going to hope that just spamming out some Drogskol Captains gets there, because it might. And if we hit a land, I think that's the dream, maybe? No, maybe not quite, but either way, this is great. We'll keep this one, and we'll ship a Wanderer, and good enough. Okay. Can't tell if our opponent mulliganed or not. Actually, it looks like they mulliganed as well. So we're both starting on 6, and this is a pretty good 6. We get a lead on the Vial. I'll probably Seachrome Coast the Vial rather than fetch. That way, if I don't draw a 2-drop, I can fetch out a Hallowed Fountain without paining myself. There's not much of a downside there. I mean, I suppose the only technical small downside is that we know that there is a good card on the bottom of our deck, so if I were to shuffle on turn 1, I could draw a Mausoleum Wanderer in turn 2. But, and if our opponent was, on Storm, then maybe that actually is like a small consideration that you would make. And if you get Storm, that Mausoleum Wanderer would be a lot more relevant than that Life would be. But given that we don't know what our opponent is playing, I'm probably just going to lead on the Seachrome Coast here and the Vial. You wonder, right? You watch somebody like, it's an easy example, I guess, but Gabriel Nassif play, Hall of Famer, possibly the best ever. I believe he's tied for 3rd, or is in 3rd. He's top 4 all time in top finishes, Pro Tour, World, top 8s, that sort of thing. But he plays very slow, and everyone knows this, and sometimes he goes into the tank as early as turn 1, and people are just like, how can you possibly be this slow on the first turn of the game? Say land, go. Well, look at our hand here. Think about how much we thought we just put into what our first land was. And we didn't really need to. We kind of came to the same conclusion I think you probably always are likely to come to. There is a thought there. And if you're somebody as good as Gabriel Nassif, you probably put a lot more thought into it than I do most of the time. Which is to say, there's nothing wrong with playing slow when you need the time to think. Our opponent, though, unfortunately for us, frankly kind of popping off. Just Turtle and Arbor Elf is rarely a harbinger of good things to come. That card makes a lot of mana once Utopia Sprawls get involved. I guess I'd really like to hit a 2-drop Spirit here. I would like to add to my board in some way before I vial in this Mausoleum Wanderer. Because our opponent could have access, by the way, to 4 mana on turn 2. That's how it works. Utopia Sprawl, put on this, tap for 2, untap, tap for 2 more. It can get pretty nutty. Alright, well, not quite. Our life total does seem somewhat likely to matter. That said, I can just fetch out an island, so or the Hallowed Fountain now, because all we have is a Wanderer. Now, our hand is going to power up pretty quickly after that, and because we do have the lands here, I'll be able to go Captain next turn, Captain the turn after that on Vial. So if we could draw one more good Spirit here, whether that's a Supreme Phantom and we're just trying to race, or it's a Spell Queller and we're gonna counter it, Skyclave Apparition. I feel like we're one good creature off the top of our deck for putting together something pretty special in this one. That said, our opponent is starting the dreaded turn 2 Arbor Elf here, shocking it in. But I'll be honest, Giver of Runes is not one that I'm very concerned about here. This card is very fair in the sense that it's only good if you have blockers. All right, Conclave Mentor. If one or more counters we put on a creature, put that many +1. This is a combo piece. So good to know. I don't know if our opponent's trying to combo over there. I don't know if we're going to be fast enough. We could try, and we were on the play, but I think missing our 2 spot there, having no play on turn 2 while our opponent plays out, ramp into protection into combo piece. Yeah, we're like a quarter calling away from things getting pretty bad here. A company, whatever you have, right? So that said, we can still on this turn hit a 2-drop and have it be of use because we can play the Drogskol Captain from our hand and then vial in the 2-drop before having it up to 3 next turn to vial in the other captain. So we weren't able to use our mana on turn 2, and that's bad. But hopefully we'll be able to be a little more efficient here on turn 3 at least. Again, maybe not. I guess we get in for 3, though. No reach here? Yeah. All right. Well, we put them down to 12. We're going to swing next turn for 7. So they're on a 2-turn clock. Oh, gosh. 3 turns? I mean, 2 turns for me, but that means they get this turn plus 2 more? That's terrible for us. Maybe they get one more after. We'll see. One more after this. Spike Feeder, though, is this the combo? Is it that simple? I think they untap and we die. I don't care about this attack. I know that. Maybe. Oh, they got the Giver of Ruin, so it doesn't even matter. Okay, so remove a counter, put a counter on target creature. So for 2 mana, they can remove a 1/1 counter from the Spike Feeder, put a counter on the Spike Feeder. This will make him put 2 counters on the Spike Feeder. That said, and then you can remove it to gain 2 life. So for every 2 mana, they can net 1 counter and then net 2 life. I mean, it's not that that's bad per se, but it's actually not that good either. I mean, it doesn't kill us. I'll go ahead and tick this up, I guess. Wow, I'm glad I did. The problem is it still isn't going to be lethal. I say that, is it? 6, 5, 11? Do I have 11? No, I have 10. Yeah, not even close. I mean, I say that. That could matter. The fact that I mean, they can still fetch, unfortunately. If we were dealing 11, actually, and putting them at 1, that would be much more powerful because it means a fetch lane would be turned off. So, that said, if our opponent doesn't have a way to turn this into actual infinite, and I think they can't be that far away from that, right? I'm sure they'll show us, but unless they have actual infinite, we have 1 billion power in the air, right? We have literally 16 power right now. It's pretty good. All flying. So just completely dodged, the Giver of Runes is just a complete blank. Our opponent mulliganed to 6 and then had a Giver of Runes, which did Stone Cold nothing. As a matter of fact, none of their cards did anything this game if they weren't able to combo. They can gain a bunch of life here, but can they even gain enough? They can remove 6 counters, which gains 12 life. Wow, that's crazy. It's not even enough. They can get rid of all of these, gain 12 life, go up to 14, but again, we have 16 power in the air. Just burning through the Spike Feeder. So, unless I'm missing something and we're actually dead, or... No, that's it, because they can't even... It's a different world where they untap a forest, the Temple card, and then they path one of our lords or whatever, but we've got the trifecta here. Everything has hexproof. This game's over. Our opponent's going to have to figure that out, but this game is over. I suppose they could fog us. Because even if I countered the fog with Mausoleum Wanderer, we'd only have 12 at that point. But I feel pretty good about where we're at. I'm going to take this thing up to 4. I have no 4s, but all my 3s I'd be able to play anyways. There's a Shacklegeist. And maybe we'll make them think we have something. I don't know why they haven't scooped. I wish they would. It certainly would make it less stressful. Now I'm just thinking about all the fogs they're going to have. This is an interesting one. When I first saw this card sent to us, and we did take that game in at least, I saw this card sent to us to preview, and I didn't think it was that good at first. It's not that I thought it was bad. It just felt like, this came out in Core Set 2021. There's a lot of powerful cards and a lot of powerful spirits by the time we get around to Core Set 2021. I didn't know that a 2/2 for 2 that came with restrictions would be good enough. Especially, it's not like you want to tap your spirits. You want to attack with your spirits. So I didn't know it would make it. But you know what? It has seemed to be a nice piece, actually. Alright, so our opponent's on fair green-white combo-y stuff. I don't even remember what the spike... It's whenever you... Archangel of Thune, 5 mana, whenever you gain life, put a counter on each creature you control. That's the infinite life combo with Spike Feeder. And then if you have the Conclave Mentor out, it's also infinite counters. That's the combo. So I'm trying to think if anything we have actually interacts with that. And it kind of doesn't, outside of Force of Negation, which is frankly pretty medium. We'll free roam one though. We never saw Quarter Calling or Collected Company. I assume they have those things, but even if they do, I don't know that I necessarily want... I'm going to keep this hand. It's pretty risky, but look, it's a 1-2-3 curve with Lords involved. We draw 1 land in the first 2 games, and I feel great about this one. Our first 2 turns. Our Giver of Runes don't seem like they do much. You know, something like Blessed Alliance is pretty medium. Force of Negation, in theory, hits a company or a Court of Calling. That we didn't see. I assume they have, and it's possible I won all three of them. But it's also possible that my main deck is just kind of good enough to try to race them, right? And our opponent mulled to 6 again here. And they got the Sprawl, but no Elf this time. It's not a land, and I do have to go ahead and fetch here. Well, we're going to have to... I mean, we're asking our Aether Vial to put in some work here. That said, Mausoleum Wanderer into Supreme Phantom, into Drogskol Captain, into Drogskol Captain. That's a lot of power. It's a lot of lords. It's a lot of hexproof. I mean, you got to keep one lander sometime, right? Sometimes it's got it. Sometimes it's correct. And the thing is, especially in this case, right? I'm giving the scenario where we don't hit land. And we missed on our first draw set. But imagine we hit land here. I play Supreme Phantom. I pass the turn. I keep the Mausoleum Wanderer in on the Vial. I untap after that. I have 2 Rattlechains, even if we don't hit land for the Drogskol Captain. I mean, this hand's upside was just off the charts. And the downside is that we get to play the game slowly. There's no way you mulligan that hand, I think. At least the way I play. And, you know, is what remains to be seen how good that is in this game in particular. It's known to be fairly medium, but I do feel good about this decision. So we'll put our counter on the Vial. Cross our fingers to hit land. Our opponent has added a turn 2 Heliod here. Whenever you gain life, put a counter. I assume that this also then combos with Spike Feeder. In fact, this just goes infinite with Spike Feeder on turn 3. Wow. There's just not much I can do about that. Right? Because you remove the counter from Spike Feeder, gain 2 life, and then you get to put 1 back. Pretty sure that's a 2-card combo on turn 3. We hit our land, by the way. So the thing is, this is actually going to be a great draw for us with this. Now, obviously, another land really rounds it out, but this is already very strong, and it might not matter because our opponent might just gain infinite life on turn 3 here. All right, what does that do? Nothing yet? They have to gain life to start it? Okay, well, we're not dead. Put this Wanderer into play. The beatdown begins. They can give creatures lifelink too, which is also kind of annoying. Especially because they actually would make this thing pretty big. Well, I'll tell you what, that helps quite a bit. Let's attack. I'm not going to bring anything in. I'm going to rely heavily on the fact that we just drew one of the few pieces of interaction in our deck with this Path to Exile here. And this really opens up a lot of options because the Vial's on 2. That means we have access to 1 Rattlechains no matter what. But we also now have 2 mana, so we do have access to a second Rattlechains if we want it. But because we draw the Path here, it just becomes so free for us to just attack for 3. Not a huge attack, but then we have access to Path to Exile if they try to combo. We can break up a combo. And we have access to Rattlechains if they try to interact with our board via Skyclave Apparition or something like that. So this is why I keep saying it, but this is why you play Spirits. We just have every angle of attack our opponent could come up with covered. And then next turn we get to make everything hexproof. So this is... I really, really like decks like this. It kind of feels like Merfolk, I'll be honest. That's probably why I'm so drawn to playing Spirits in whatever format I can. It feels a lot like playing Merfolk, let's be real. I love it. Our opponent must not, because they're in the tank, though. One would assume if they had the infinite combo, they would just untap and try to slam it. But instead, all they had was the Arbor Elf. So that could mean that they do have, a Chord or something like that. Chord of Calling, a Collected Company that they needed to kind of ramp out to. That's all possible, for sure. But this is basically as good as it's going to get for us. And I'll be honest, I don't actually know if we can beat that combo. I think that combo may be able to go off in response to removal. So it's possible the Path to Exile does nothing. And if that's the case, we'll just take them out, probably. But we get to come in for at least 5 damage next turn. I'm sorry, 3. 5, 6 damage next turn. But that may not matter if we're dead. So let's see what our opponent wants to run out here. A Ranger Captain of Eos, huh? Well, something tells me that's bad for us. Search your library for a creature card with CMC 1 or less. What does that mean? What do you get? Giver of Runes? You can always sack this. It's the other half of the card. Sacking your opponent's can't cast non-creature spells this turn. This has found a little bit of a place in Modern. I think this card would have been really good if Modern hadn't jumped up in power level around the same time this card was printed. This is actually a pretty cool riff on just Captain of Eos, I believe. Ranger of Eos? Ranger of Eos. That would go get 2 1-drops out of your deck for 4 mana. Sort of the classic go get these Sarah Ascendants out of my deck type card. Oh, well, the Ballista makes more sense. Does that just kill us? I would assume that just kills us, right? Unless I can find a way to put together lethal. Ooh, I could put together lethal. Unless we're just dead. Which we are, right? Or maybe they have to... I don't remember how this combo works. Frankly, I'm not going to worry about it because it doesn't matter that much. Unless I'm wrong and we're dead anyway. But I think if you put it out for 1... Oh, they're just going to do this. Okay. Yeah, I think you have to be able to do the Ballista for 2 to combo, if I recall, because you have to be able to remove a counter without it dying. I think if we hit land, we can win. I think that's what this is going to look like. We might just have it anyways, come to think of it. I don't want to do the math, but we might just have it. I suppose I'm going to have to do the math. My opponent's going to make me think about it, but... We're going to put the Vial up to 3 for the Drogskol Captain next turn. And that means we attack for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because it's going to get a trigger. 7, 8, 9, 10. 11, 12, 13, 14. I think we have 14. And I think our opponent's tapped out. We might be able to pull this one off with, what is that, a turn 4 kill? That's why you keep 1-landers, everybody. Our opponent has the combo in hand, and we're not going to let him get there. This is nice. This worked out very well for us. Drogskol Captain is... I remember... this is not when I started playing, but Dark Ascension Innistrad was around when I started playing within a year, probably a couple years. I remember seeing this card for the first time and loving it, and then... of course, it became relevant years later. I mean, Spirits was not really a deck in Standard at that time. Sorry, typing my opponent here. There was a Zombies deck that was actually pretty good, though. There were some cool decks in that format, that's for sure. But Spirits was not really one of them. But then years later, basically Collected Company and maybe it was Supreme Phantom. It might have been before that. Drogskol Captain came back in a big way as Spirits began to make their way into sort of competitive, the competitive realm. I'll tell you, they did it great. Look at this. We just just had it all at all times. Actually, just never didn't have everything we needed every single game. It was already exactly lethal. Now it's a billion lethal. What a deck, everybody. Blue-white Spirits. I don't even... it was always sort of questionable-ish as whether you needed the green. You'd play blue-white, but you had to play stuff like Tallow-Wisp or these other one-drop Spirits that just weren't really at the power level you wanted your Modern deck to be. And now you don't have to do that. Skyclave Apparition just fills a massive hole in the deck, and you saw the power of it right there. Well, not in that match, but in those games you saw where Spirits is at as an archetype in Modern. It looked good today in all of the matches we played. So everybody, that was great. I have no changes to suggest. That was, obviously the sideboard you can tailor as you want. The main deck, though, I honestly probably would not touch a thing. That was very nice. If you're going to do anything, maybe you cut an Aether Vial, you go down to 3, and you play the 4th Giver of Runes, I guess. Another Selfless Spirit, depending on your meta, so on. But I'll tell you, everybody, this deck looked great. So thank you so much for watching, as always. Mining Modern, everybody. Every week on Cool Stuff on Thursdays, Mining Modern and Punting Pioneer, I've got content. I've been thinking about making historic content. I like to play that format quite a bit. So if that's something you all would like to see, maybe suggest a fun name for it in the comments and let me know. Other than that, everybody, thanks again. I'll see you next week.